And now, the survival show that once survived, throwing stones in a glass house. In this episode, Josh stops back by to shed light on night vision for preppers. He'll lay out simply when, where, and how the expense of night vision may or may not make sense for you. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 219. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Before we dive into owning the night, a few quick things. First, this is a summer short, though it's a full-length episode. You see, we've gone longer than expected getting a summer episode to you. Not due to slacking, per se, but wrestling with kind of a very heavy topic. So, to make it up to you, we've got an Armada-requested full-length episode. One last thing. The next season starts August 7th. That's August 7th. Set your calendars. It's coming up fast. And now, night vision. Okay, so this is going to be a semi-unformal show and completely unscripted. Here with Josh again, and we're going to talk about night vision, and it's going to just be fun, casual stuff. And I'm literally going to be like playing with and learning about night vision along with everyone else. Now, I've had, well, first, Josh, thank you for coming back. Actually, it's funny. I got two former co-hosts, and none of those bastards have sat where you have since I moved into this new space and recorded. You've been here now twice as much as them. I think it's going to be fun to talk about this. My biggest reservation, and we'll get into this in more depth, with night vision in general, is that it's a toy I shouldn't call it a toy. Well, I guess in my case, it would be a toy. And that's really kind of how I look at it. It is a tool that I would buy. I would finger fiddle. And that's about it. Maybe I'd run around in the backyard a little bit. But I mean, unless like the balloon really went up, I've spent a whole lot of money on something that I just don't need. And that's money I could have spent on training or whatever else. And so we'll get into all this stuff in a bit. But let's start with the history, because the history actually goes way back and it's pretty interesting. So Josh, where does night vision begin?
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be back here. So night vision originally began back in the 1920s or so. A lot of people don't realize it goes that far back. We normally think of it being used first in the Vietnam era with things like starlight scopes and snipers hunting Vietnamese and people like that back in the jungles. But both the U.S. and the German forces developed night vision that was used throughout part of World War II. The Germans got it into 1939. They started putting some units together. They actually equipped them on tanks as well later in the war on the Sturmgewehr rifles. And then the U.S. Used them throughout the Pacific campaign for sure. But yes, and those were what we call active systems. There's two different terms. So there's active and passive, and then there's also thermal and a couple other types. But active systems send out a near infrared light source. It's a projection of a light, sort of like the different IR illuminators that you see on the market these days. And it could not collect any light and amplify that image for you. So that's what a passive system is. So the active system has to send out a light, and then the receiver through the objective lens sees what that light is capturing or is reflecting off of and sends it back to the image. And so those were those systems, and they were used quite effectively throughout the war. And then that's really what we call Generation Zero, right? The Generation Zero was that era of devices. Then once we got in towards the Vietnam era, most of this obviously is driven by the need to see at night, right? Because especially in a warfighting scenario, that's really important. If you can dominate the night or the darkness, then you can own both day and night operations. And if your enemy doesn't have that advantage, then they're at a loss and you're at an advantage. You're at a gain. So in the Vietnam era, they developed the starlight scopes and things like that. These are true Generation 1 night vision devices.
Okay.
And they're passive. And what that means is that it has a photocathode on the front of the lens that brings in the lights that you see, and then it changes that over to an electron, and it goes into an image intensification tube, and then it projects that image back at you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is about 1,000 times magnification of the ambient light outside.
Wow. Okay.
So that sounds like a lot, but when we start talking about some of these other generations, it may be like, whoa,
really crazy,
hang on a second now. So yeah, and it's really impressive what back in World War II with Generation Zeros and the Gen 1s, what these people were able to accomplish with these very primitive, in a way, tools. State of the art for the time, but as we look at them now, very primitive.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of the history. Then as we move forward, they started developing Generation 2 technology, and now we're into Generation 3 and 3 plus, or some people will call it 4, but it's really not. And we'll kind of go into some more of that.
Okay. All right. So you've got these different generations, and we've got 1, 2, and we're maybe on 3 now?
Yeah, we're actually into like technically 3 plus would be where it was.
Ooh.
There was a 4 for a while.
What's with the pluses? I know this is like, I'm totally distracting. What's with the freaking pluses? Like,
so that's a really good question. So in order to answer that very thoroughly, let's describe exactly how we have the passive system, which is what we think of modern night vision. So like, you see the military guys running around with the headsets, or the law enforcement, or you see a movie with night vision gear. So basically what that is, it's a passive system. And again, that's the front lens, the photons coming through the photocathode. They're transformed into electrons at that point, and they're into an intensifying tube, which intensifies those electrons and then projects them back at you through a phosphorus screen, which gives it that green glow. Okay.
Oh, okay.
When we moved into Gen 3, what they did was they added behind the photocathode, before the intensifying tube, they added what's called a microchannel plate. This microchannel plate multiplies those electrons massive amounts. Yeah. So basically what they did was they took the Gen 2 and then they added some more components to it, and they made it a Gen 3.
Okay.
Right? And basically, so Gen 2 does about 20,000 intensification. So remember, Gen 1 was 1,000.
Right.
Gen 2 bumps that up a whole lot, up to about 20,000.
Wow.
And then Gen 3, they do about 30,000.
Man.
Around there, maybe a little more in some cases. Some people say up to 50 with certain devices, but I think it's still usually around 30.
Right.
So that's where we're sitting nowadays.
Okay.
With the pluses, like you said, they have been able to tweak Gen 2 to the point where a Gen 2 plus unit is working up near the 30,000 point.
So is it by, and I know we're getting a bit into the weeds here, is it just simply by fine tuning the existing technology, or are they adding in a little extra something into it?
Exactly.
To give it that plus?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
They add things in and they tweak things and add better quality tubes and things.
So, I mean, I guess looking at this from a perspective of, for the same reason, like we're kind of talking about it too, is an interest in it. I mean, everybody in the community has an interest in these things, but a lot of people can't afford them. I can say, I'm not going to go out and dump the money on it. I mean, part of the problem too is like I get a little obsessive and I'm like, well, I don't want Gen 1. I want Gen 3. I'm just going to save my money. And then Gen 4 comes out and I'm like, well, screw that. I want Gen 4 now. So I'm just going to keep saving my money. So I guess when it becomes a question of what is useful in these, and I guess we should also point out there's huge price differences between 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And even with the pluses, like you get it's a plus, it's a few pluses to the dollars too, every time you get into this. So like, is Gen 1 even really usable?
Honestly, no.
Yeah.
Honestly, no. I don't think I've ever used a Gen 1 unit that I would say I was comfortable putting myself in any sort of dangerous situation using it. Even hunting, it's not that user friendly.
Yeah. And I think maybe I guess the other question too is because we get into the question of target identification.
Right. So let's think about this. So let's say active systems, like we said, we sent out the near infrared light source. Think about like your average home security system, right? Mm-hmm. They've got those LEDs around it, and at night they send out the infrared. You've seen the little red glow coming out from them. So when you're dealing with Gen 1, in order to really make that usable, you have to be sending out a really powerful near infrared beam or IR illuminator, right? You have to use that in order to make it somewhat usable. So that's an added cost that people aren't factoring into that, right?
And an added battery cost. You're sucking up a lot of juice to generate that light and throw it out there.
Right. So they're usually standalone units. Most of the Gen 1 units come with some sort of IR illuminator built in.
Okay.
But they're not very powerful past 15, 20 feet. So you want something that can go out past that for the identification factor, like you said. So generally for me, if I'm talking to anybody that's interested in using this for any sort of hunting or security or anything like that, I always recommend at least a Gen 2 unit minimum. Preferably Gen 2 Plus to 3. That's where I fall as far as actual night vision. The other thing to talk about, though, and a lot of people don't consider this, especially for either some sort of rural security or actual domestic security in and around a home, thermal imaging units have come down a lot. And with night vision, the reason why we talk a lot about night vision is because, well, that's what the military has, and everybody thinks that, or law enforcement, and everybody thinks that I need that. When I'm at my home and I just want to see if there's somebody walking along the back fence line or something like that, I may not need an actual night vision that intensifies all the light around me and I can see things clearly and I can move around, right? I may not need that. I might just need a thermal imaging device that can pop up on a red hot or white hot or black hot.
Tell me something living is out there.
Tell me something living's out there.
I got
exactly.
it. Okay.
And some of those have come down, and in a lot of cases, they're half the cost of what a decent Gen.
Oh, wow. That's why I totally didn't know this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. That's neat.
Yeah. And even some of these now have come down. Leopold just introduced a new one this past year at SHOT Show called the LTO, the Leopold Thermal Optic.
I remember seeing the announcement in the Armada group about that. I think it was you that posted it.
I think it was, yeah. And it's really cool. It's like $600 or $700 out the door, and it's reasonable. Like it's usable, right? But at the same time, you're going to get more clarification from that little screen than you would from a Gen 1 unit that costs the exact same price.
So I haven't played with thermal. I've only seen the photographs of stuff. When you're talking about target identification, like, so what you were talking about when I'm like, okay, you see a splotch on the screen. Now you know something's out there.
Right.
Are you able to figure out kind of what it is? I mean, other than whether it's a man or an animal or a man walking around on all floors, which would be weird. You want to know if that kind of weirdo is walking around out there, like, because,
right,
you're dealing with some strange stuff, and you should watch yourself because you never know what's going to come flying out of the bushes at you.
Could be a killer rabbit, man.
Could be a killer rabbit. It could be, it could be a drunk naked guy high on, I don't know, ice or whatever the latest crazy crocodile lovemaking drug out there on the market is.
It could be Josh and Aaron drinking vodka till 3 a.m., recording podcasts, stumbling out the front door.
That's true. Although I'm getting old and my level of shenanigans is coming down. I'm like,
Yeah, so most of these devices all have some sort of gauge or identification marker in the documentation for the unit. They'll say that, you can identify a man-sized target out to this distance, right? You can see something's out there glowing if it's thermal, out to X distance, 1,000 yards, let's just say. And then, it can identify a person out to 100 to 200 yards. So most of those devices all have something along those lines. So obviously do your research, figure out what's in your price point, look at it. The cool thing is a lot of the technology for some of these devices is very similar, because when I talk about thermal imaging, people think of it as like a camera or something like that. It's actually just a sensor, really, that's picking up this wavelength of heat signature / light, right?
Oh, that explains why it's cheaper. Okay.
Exactly.
I get it now. Yeah.
So it's like a sensor. And so this just comes back. So it's all computer generated. And with thermal too, because of this system, it's a closed system. It doesn't have things like intensifying tubes like night vision and stuff like that. The lifetime or the life of the unit lasts a lot longer.
Yeah, because that's another thing that I don't think many people know about. Like the night vision devices, they've got a lifespan on them. And it's not just like a technology like your iPhone's going to slow down kind of lifespan. Like they go bad.
Right. No,
it takes a while, but
it does. So like a Gen 2 unit, a Gen 2 or Gen 2 Plus unit usually has a lifespan of around 5,000 hours.
Okay.
That's like 200 days or something like that. So like, if you ran it for almost a whole year, right? Okay. So that's pretty reasonable. If you're going to pull it out and use it every once in a while, you're going to be just fine. Most Gen 3 units have at least a 10,000 hour lifetime on the life cycle of the unit. So that's going to be a general service lifetime. I mean, like if you figure your average law enforcement guy is going to use it overnight every once in a while, a couple times a month or a year, he's going to run most of his career being able to do that. And then, grab another one in the middle of that. So when you're looking at $3,000 or $4,000 for a really nice Gen 3 unit, that cost can be justified over the life of the unit. Yeah. But if you're going to stick something in a drawer and rarely ever use it,
$3,000 is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, right? So let's back up a little bit and talk about the usefulness of night vision versus thermal, or just night vision in general. So there's all these different options out there for night vision gear, right? You can buy one that clips onto a helmet as a binocular type deal, or straps on your head as binocular. Well, the military has gone away from that. Most law enforcement agencies have gone away from that system overall.
How come?
Well, when you're going to invest in a night vision unit, you want it to be as versatile as possible. And so they also make things like just single binoculars, like your standard or PVS 14. And then they have the double system, right? The 2-tube systems that go over, which we see in Hollywood all the time. They've got the 4-tube ones.
Yeah, the bug eye ones
ones you saw in like Zero Dark 30 and all this, that these really specialized teams use. That's really fun. But if you want to spend $40,000 to $45,000, yeah, not really what everybody wants to go plink down for a weekend trip out hunting.
Right.
But anyway, so then they also have things like clip-on weapon sights for night vision. So if you wanted to take your favorite hunting rifle and you wanted to be able to hunt hogs at night with a night vision unit, you can clip a night vision clip-on unit in front of your scope, and you don't change your zero or anything. And now you have night vision capability and just shines through your scope and you can see things, which is really handy, right? That's really cool. The cool thing about a standard binocular, though, is that it's very versatile. It can do all of these things that we just talked about with one unit. Okay. You can put it on a helmet and you can put it in front of your eye, and you can have one-eyed night vision and the other one's by itself. And that allows you to maintain situational awareness around you, spatial awareness, which is really important.
See, and that was going to be one of my other questions, because I'd heard for a long time that depth perception, it gets really diminished with night vision. And so I guess, does that take care of that when you have one eye that's uncovered and one eye covered?
That's the reason why, like, you see these 4-tube units, like what we were just talking about with like the Navy SEALs or whoever is using these things. One, it helps with depth perception and situational awareness, because when there's multiple ones, they can feed in more data and you can see things a little easier. And also they train with these. So it's not like being completely in daylight, because obviously you're 6 inches out in front of your face is where those things gather in the light from or more. And so that is a problem. Depth perception is a problem. Situational awareness, spatial awareness is a problem when you're using these things. So a binocular allows you to have one eye open and one eye being with the night vision unit in front of it, and you can see more. Okay. So that's really fun. The other cool thing is that most of the PVS units, the PVS 14 units, they can be rated up to 300 blackout. So you can do 7.62 by 39. You could do 5.56. You could do 300 blackout. You could clip this thing to a to a rifle and use it as a night vision device for your rifle. And then you could take it back off and put it on your helmet and walk around. So really handy. There's a lot of different things you could do with it. So that's where I like the binoculars the most. Plus, also, you can just use it as a handheld unit. Yeah. You can just put it in your hand, walk around, and look where you need to look.
How far out can you see with one of these things?
Technically to infinity, right?
Right, but I mean, like, usable, like where I'm actually going to be able to make out what I'm looking at and not just green blobs.
So that's really so the objective lens on these things is not perfect. So basically, you have to focus this thing like you would an old camera, right? So it's not automatic. It doesn't show you.
That's interesting. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah.
Wow,
so generally, they say if you can focus it to about 15 yards, you can work with anything past that pretty much. And that's usually about what I've found as well when I've been using these. So I've used these a lot in training. I've used these a lot in security work, running around doing interesting things. And that's about right. That's what we were trained on. That's what I've been trained with and what I tell people to do. So about 15 yards is your focus point for that. And now when you come things in, they're going to be a little bit less clear, and things a little further out are going to be a little bit more clear than that, but not perfectly defined. But if you really need to sit there and get a fine designation on something, you can focus it in just right and see. There is actually some cool accessories out there. There is one that clips on. It sort of acts as an iris to the lens and the front objective, and it will allow you to focus in closer than that. So you can pretty much see forward and back almost to infinity. The only problem with that is that it actually diminishes the amount of light that's coming in. And so the effectiveness of the unit is diminished because of that. So they only recommend using it in like urban areas where there's a lot of ambient light and things like that, or you're using a lot of IR illuminators. Yeah.
Huh. So, you brought up an interesting point about as far as like being able to put it on the rifle, take it off the rifle, put it in a monocular. And one of the things, I don't remember who where the conversation came up, but it was a conversation with somebody that's used them. And it was about why they didn't like them on the rifle, because every time you need to look at something, you're pointing a rifle at what you're looking at. And you don't always want to do that until you have a positive target identification. That you should be pointing a rifle at it, I guess, is the long-winded way of where I'm getting with that. What are your thoughts on it? And as far as working with it, like what ends up being the best solution to be able to work in? Because let's face it, anybody listening to this, like they're going to want one of two things are going to happen if they go out and buy one of these things. It's going to end up being an expensive toy that they've got and they enjoy and they have fun with it or whatever. And they're like, I've got night vision. That's going to be me. And then there's the other situation, the unlikely scenario where society slides sideways and we need to see what's going on at night and we need to point guns at things. What is that like? Like, how does that shake out? How does that work?
Good question. So basically, if it's going to be on a rifle, it's going to be stationary. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be stationary, right? So if I take a clip-on weapon sight, or if I take a PVS 14 unit and I clip it onto my rifle, I'm not going to be running around looking through my rifle the whole time, up and pointing my rifle at things. It doesn't make any sense. You could do that, but it doesn't make any sense logically, because there's other options out there. There's better options out there. So if there's going to be a sight that's attached to the rifle, you pretty much think hunting, something along those lines. Maybe I've got a really long piece of property and I'm trying to make sure that nobody comes in my property at night whenever, there's a zombie apocalypse or whatever, right? I'm not going to be moving around too much if I've got something clipped to my rifle. So what I would do in what mostly everybody else does, and this is kind of how we've talked about how the military has influenced so many different things when it comes to night vision. They've created the need for it almost single-handedly, right. And they developed the way that it has developed, or they've created the way that it's developed. So what they do is they take infrared lasers and they put those on their rifles, and then they wear the monocular or the goggles and they put those on. And then now they have the ability to move, see what's going on around them, identify what's going on around them. And if they need to shoot something or they need to point a weapon at something, they have an IR laser, which is invisible to the naked eye, but the night vision device can see it.
This explains the laser to me now, because before I was like, I don't get the laser on the gun. Like I've played with lasers and I'm like, this is useless.
Well, so that's, so you have visible lasers, red and green lasers, right? Those don't work very well with IR because they're super bright, obviously, or night vision. So that's why they've developed infrared lasers. And they've actually come out with some pretty decent infrared lasers that are not that expensive. I mean, we're talking a couple $100 or maybe $300 or $400 or $500.
That's better than, and I can't remember the name of it, but the units that I've looked at, it's like the super secret squirrel guys, like the Travis Haleys of the world.
Well, you like your nice toys, so
I like nice things, but I've looked at them and gone, I ain't spending that kind of money on it on a device that also I never got the point of the laser, because like I said, I've played with the lasers and there are use case scenarios, but they're narrow window use case scenarios. And I've also seen where lasers on guns can distract and throw off a shooter. And then the other problem is that a laser is a perfectly straight line, barring gravity and other weird things that, the science geeks of the world are going to be like, Aaron, it's not always a perfect straight line. Okay, so for the distances you're going to shoot, it's going to be a perfectly straight line, whereas the trajectory of your bullet is not perfectly straight. So where your bullet and your laser meet is always a very specific spot.
Right.
And you're going to be, if you've got a gun out, it's going to be a very dynamic situation. Distances are going to shift and change. So point of aim, point of impact with a laser isn't always the same. So I was really confused about why, but that's making more sense about why you would put it on there now.
That's a really good point too, because, the aim point of your laser is a straight line and the bullets don't fly in a straight line, right? We think they do, but they go up and down and they can move left to right and they can do other things. Same reason why you have to sight in a scope, right? So same thing with the laser. You would have to sight it in. You'd have to figure out exactly where you wanted it to hit. But also the reason why there are clip-on night vision sights, because a laser won't work really well out to 1,000 yards, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Even if the laser could reach out there with class 1 civilian lasers, there's different types.
It has to be a really powerful, really expensive, finely tuned laser.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll go out there depending on but the government restricts the types of infrared lasers that civilians can own. It's called class 1.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so there's the military grade or the civilian or the law enforcement grade, which is much more powerful, and the civilians are stuck with a lower power one, which when you're working in close quarters, inside a house or in a neighborhood or something like that, that's actually almost beneficial because the larger lasers will what's called blooming. They're too powerful, right? And for close ranges. And so nowadays, a lot of the lasers that have come out for military and law enforcement have power settings, and they can dial those down so they're not super bright up close.
Okay, just like the scopes. And I guess we should back up for a second so that people aren't. Blooming is where something is too bright in your scope, and it basically makes it difficult to see what you're actually aiming at or pointing at.
Right. So if you've got night vision and it's on, if you look at a big light source, it will bloom, right? It'll be a lot brighter than it really is. And they've worked on that now. So when we talk about the different generations, and we talked earlier about Gen 4, well, what they did was the company that made these tubes went in and they took out a component and they realized they had a lot better stuff. But the problem was that it wasn't very durable, and it diminished the life of the tube down to like really, really low hours. So what they did was, instead of removing it, they just trimmed it down. And that's what we have Gen 3 Plus, as people call it. That's called Pinnacle. That's from a company called ITT. So it's a Gen 3 Pinnacle unit. And so and the Gen 3 Pinnacle unit is really, really, really good. It's got a lot of really interesting and awesome features to it, but they're also the top of the price range.
So what is top of the price? I mean, barring the $40,000 bug eye system, what are we talking about for a Gen 3 Plus system?
Gen 3 Plus system is Gen 3 Plus. You're looking at around $4,000. Gen 3, a decent Gen 3 unit is probably going to be around $3,000.
No, but you had also said like Gen 2 is certainly usable. So what are we talking about price? Because I know those prices have come down considerably in the time span that I've been interested in this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So you can do a decent Gen 3 unit is going to be $1,400 up to $3,000. So I've seen, depending on the level of stuff that's attached to them as far as options and features, you can push the price of a Gen 3 unit with a Gen 2 unit.
Okay. So in that point, I mean, that's still an expensive piece of equipment, but it's, you're talking about that's the same price as like good glass.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So and what we were talking about with the Pinnacle tube and all these different things, they have what's called auto-gated technology. And auto-gated technology, they also have auto-gate in some other units as well now, I believe. So auto-gating basically reduces the amount of blooming that happens. So you can work around more ambient light, so more urban areas with other light sources coming in. And it won't mess up your vision, and it won't mess up the tube as much. Now,
see, now that's really good to know, because, well, this is an urban show, but also even just for me, like I'm in a very, urban environment, even though, I mean, we're on a large property, it's still like, it's a lot of really bright lights all around me.
So knowing you and your situation, what I would recommend for you, if you needed a fully capable unit, I would recommend to you something like a PVS 14 Gen 3 auto-gated unit. So you're going to be able to see everything you want to see and then some with it. Now, these also come with a gain feature, and you can turn the brightness up or down as well in your unit. So if it's really bright for you. Now, the thing with auto-gated is it helps, but prolonged light exposure will degrade the tube eventually over time.
See, now, and that's something that we should probably touch on, because I'm sort of aware of this problem, but it's like, these are not things that you can take out and just leave on your head or leave on the rifle and go out in daylight. Is that's what I've heard, because you're basically going to fry out the unit.
Right. Yeah. So generally they come with a cover on the front. If you're going to leave it laying around, always keep the cover on at minimum. Don't take the cover off and try to activate it during the daylight. It'll mess it up. So original units, it would actually kill the unit. Nowadays, most of them are at least equipped with a shutoff feature. So if they do get exposed to super bright light, it will shut off the unit and hopefully not damage it too much.
So, but now this isn't a problem for thermal, because thermal is working like it's basically, it's the same sensor that's in your camera phone or in your nice DSLR camera. It's just tuned to a different wavelength of light. Is that an easy way of putting it?
Yeah.
Or am I botching that?
That's a decent way of putting it. It operates on a spectrum that we can't see. It basically picks up thermal energy, is the way to do it. So it will operate in daytime or nighttime. Anyway, and the cool thing is, a lot of people don't realize, is that thermal imaging works really, really well for all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
So you want to see a hot spot in a wall where there might be some electrical issues. The wall will heat up, and it will be different temperature than the other areas around here, right? You can see that. Somebody walks across the floor. You can see in a home, you can see their warm footprints for minutes.
Really?
Somebody touches a doorknob or a car handle, and that will glow for some time. Somebody throws something down in the yard, that will glow with their thermal energy for a little while because it's a different temperature than the ambient light. Now, of course, this dives into how good your sensor is and things like that. But there are some really decently priced units out there that do this effectively. Now, the refresh rates on the screen, because it's like a sensor, it's like a digital camera, right? You know, you remember the old webcams that used to just and that's how it would update. Well, some of those thermal imagers work that way, and they have a very slow refresh rate. But that's okay for a lot of applications. Now, if you wanted something that was super uber fast, we've seen like the combat footage from the drones over the combats.
Right.
You know, those are forward-looking infrared devices or FLIR. They're super high end. They're like instant refresh rates, the whole deal. You can see all the fun stuff that happens with those. You know, we're talking about smaller handheld monocular style units that have a slower refresh rate of like, you know, every half a second or a little less than that.
Talking about stuff that's for the average civilian that doesn't have an unlimited taxpayer budget to throw money at.
Now, here's the other cool part. What do I need night vision for? My application for night vision for me is hunting, security, law enforcement, right? That's what we do. We use this to be able to go around, see things. There's a lot of good reasons to use night vision in a tactical application like that. Let's say, for instance, there's like a barricaded subject somewhere and the police have to go get the guy. They're going to want to black out if they have that ability. And that way they don't see white lights shining all over the place and they have the potential to shoot the cops. The cops have the ability to go in and find this guy in complete blackness, right? That's the same reason why the military likes them. They can own the night. For our applications, pretty similar. We could do security at our home if we needed to. We could look out the window and with the night vision device, not a thermal because thermal doesn't work through glass.
Really?
It's true.
Oh, that's neat.
It is fun. It's a fun story. And there's actually a new technology that's come out we'll talk about in a minute that actually is better than both of these. But anyway, so I can sit in my house and I can look out my back windows and I can see everybody with the lights shut off and I know what's going on around my property with night vision. Now, if somebody's hiding in the shadows still, even with night vision, sometimes you can't see everything perfectly. Right. Even if it's super pitch black dark and it won't work in a basement by itself most of the time because there's no light.
Yeah,
it needs some
it's a
sort
passive system. It's got to have.
Exactly. It's not active. Right. And so if you have some sort of some sort of infrared illuminator, you can work yourself in those situations. But they're really great. They're great passive systems. You can see a lot of detail and stuff like that. But everything is green and black. So now they've actually come out with, we talked about the electrons pass through the phosphorus layer at the back of the tube, right? And that's how it comes through your eye. That's what gives it the green and black. Now they're doing white phosphorus as well. And so instead of it being green and black, now there's white and black.
So it looks more like the thermal images we're used to.
It looks more like that. Yeah. It's sort of that more digital picture, if you will.
All right.
There is in my opinion, there's a little bit of detail sacrificed in that, but it's easier on the eye. It doesn't strain your eye as much over long usage periods. So there's a lot of different units and stuff like that are looking at the white phosphorus because it's easier on the eye. And also it's the next new cool thing, right?
Right. Well, yeah, we're all about the new cool things.
So right? I'm like, well, I want that. Why? Because it's new and different. Right. Well, yes, I do want that. Yes, I do. Do I need that? I need that.
I need that.
I can make it.
I have a safe full of things I absolutely needed.
Exactly. But anyway, so there's all these cool things. So thermal is great because I could be outside. I can't be in the home if I wanted to see what's going on outside because thermal will not travel through glass.
Okay, and I'm glad we went back here again. I totally didn't know this. And like for my purposes, in a largely glass house, like that would suck. I would be very disappointed in my purchase because like the entire back half of my house is glass. And I have a very long distance that I kind of have to keep an eye on. I've got upwards of about 750 yards in about 160 degree direction of open space that I kind of like. I don't need to keep an eye on it, but I kind of like to see what's going on out there. We'll talk
about home security and how I would have advised you against buying this house a long time ago. But
No. I walked in and I was like, as somebody who was in architecture and was a designer and everything else and had an obsession with mid-century modern and minimalism, I walked in and I have no better way of describing it. This was giant wood for Aaron. And it's funny because like longtime friends have walked in and they're like, oh yeah, this is, if there was ever a house that was like, this is Aaron, it was this one. But yeah, from a security standpoint, like, yeah, I mean, somebody standing 300 yards away from my bedroom can see all things going on in my bedroom every morning. So yeah, it's less entertaining. It's not a vision you want to see early in the morning. Yeah, from a security standpoint, this house is a nightmare. But the advantage is I also can at all times see everything going on outside. So
sure,
it's
absolutely.
a double-edged sword. But yeah,
absolutely. So you can't see what you don't know is there, right? And if you don't know it's there, you can't see it's there, right? So that's sort of like you said.
And that brings up the whole point of what we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So circling back to this, man, there's going to be a lot of editing in this show. Circling back to the whole thing about you can't see through glass. So
the infrared spectrum that thermal picks up cannot transfer through glass, right? Because it's a non-visible spectrum of light, right? So it won't transfer that energy through.
So is that because
structure.
of the UV film on most glass, or
no,
are we getting more technical than we should here?
It's getting pretty technical at this point, but just know that thermal imaging won't work through glass or any other opaque structure like that. So
all right.
They've developed certain technologies which can by in part see through different things, but that's not truly thermal, usually speaking. Okay. So anyway, but thermal is great because if you're on the same plane as they are, or meaning in the same space that they are without anything obstructing you or being around you, glass and whatnot, you can see them in pitch black darkness, also through fog, usually through rain, through smoke and things like that, as long as the smoke's not superheated. And you can see people's infrared spectrum, their heat coming through at that point, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
So, and also, night vision, you see green and black. Well, if they don't stand out in some way, shape, or form, if they're sitting still and you can't pick out their outline or shape, you don't have that problem with thermal. Mm-hmm. As long as they're not behind some sort of thermal shield or anything like that, you can see them. And that's really, really handy. Mm-hmm. So like, for instance, where I'm at, I have a lot of woods behind my house, right? And I can't always see back in those wooded areas very well with night vision, even though I've got Gen 3 and I've got an illuminator. If that dude's sitting still at 50 yards or 75 yards and he's not moving, I can't see him if there's somebody back there. A lot of times I get raccoon and deer and other things out there, and I can't see them unless they're moving around or they're clearly visible. Mm-hmm. But if I had thermal, or when I use thermal, I can see their heat signature. I can see them. I can make them out at that distance, most likely, and I can see what they're doing, which is really, really an advantage. So, and not only that, again, the cost for most of these thermal imagers now are half the cost or less of these high-end Gen 3 units.
That's amazing because
units.
It used to be the opposite.
It was the opposite for a long time.
I mean, thermal was crazy expensive. I didn't realize that. That's neat.
Yeah. FLIR has come out with some really good units that are handheld. They're small. They're compact. I mean, they're about the same size as a PVS 14 unit or a little bigger.
They also have an interesting like consumer home security camera system that's pretty neat.
They do. They've got some really fun stuff. So, that's generally the layout. So I ask people, well, what's your purpose, right? Are you going to go hunting? Are you going to use this for security, home defense? What are you going to use it for? Generally, their response is going to be in one of those categories. And then I'll advise them, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to walk around and see where you're being able to move and see what's going on around you? Then you'll want night vision. You want to see if there's something out and around your property very easily without having to do a lot of maneuvering or anything like that, then thermal is really where it's at. And thermal, not only that, but it gives you that ability to see in total darkness, and it gives you that ability to see further out with heat signatures and things like that. And not only that, but also tracing. If somebody came in through your back door, you could go and look at your thermal on the back door handle and see if somebody touched it recently.
Okay.
So that's really cool stuff.
That's kind of neat. That's really kind of neat. And I guess how useful is this really for the average prepper? I mean, if you've got $3,000 to burn, then cool, rock on with your bad self. Toys are fun. But in all reality, like how useful is this one of those things? I guess let me put it this way. Is it one of those things like you don't realize how much you need a flashlight or a pocket knife until you put one in your pocket and walk around, and then all of a sudden you're like, how did I get through life without this before? Is it that situation, or is it like Yeah, look, buddies, I've got this cool night vision thing. Okay, let me put it back in the drawer. I never use this stupid thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is a little bit of both. And,
Okay.
In my world that I operate in, this is a valid tool, right?
Okay.
That I use
Right.
and work with. In the civilian life, have I ever needed this during a power outage? No. Have I used it for home security at night? Yeah, absolutely. I've been able to step out my back door or from inside my house and look around and see if there was anybody moving around and things like that. So if you're concerned with those things, this absolutely could be a valid tool for you. Is it absolutely the thing that you need to put next on your preparedness list for items to purchase? I don't think so. Unless you live down by the border and you're really worried about folks coming on your property or messing with you and stuff like that, at which case you need more than just night vision.
Right. That's a much different situation. But I think for the average person, okay, that makes sense.
And the other part about this is in an urban area with a lot of lighting and things like that. If you're living in a modern city, this has limited application, right? Because the amount of ambient light that you have could actually compromise a lot of nice night vision devices, really good night vision devices. Over time, you're going to degrade the quality of it. It's going to go down. Now, I'm not trying to discourage you from getting it if you want one, because it will help you in certain circumstances. But it's something to think about. So that's why I suggested for you like an auto-gated unit and things like that help the light from damaging it, but will eventually in the long run cause problems and stuff like that. Personally, for me, I think the thing that people could get the most out of is, instead of a night vision unit, will be a handheld thermal unit. Just
That's
for
really interesting.
General usage.
Yeah.
You could use it for identifying all sorts of different things. But, in some sort of home defense or security situation, or even grid down or whatever, right? Is it more helpful to have a night vision device to be able to do some sort of tactical operation? Or would it be more helpful to you to have a passive system like a thermal sensor that you can sit down and see if there's a car coming down your road from 2 miles away, or see if there's people walking in your wood line, right? And things like that. Once that happens, light them up with some spotlights and say, hey, what are you doing here, kind of thing.
Right.
And, in that situation, I've actually seen a couple times where one or two people operating with some night vision devices in a rural area were actually overwhelmed, and with people that were operating properly with spotlights, that knew how to use them, that knew that there were people out there with night vision devices, and they knew how to come after them. And it was really, really interesting. And so that's an interesting case that I was around. So pretty cool stuff. But the people that had night vision devices were rendered useless because there was an organized group of people that had spotlights that were able to effectively combat that.
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting little wrinkle there.
So because the people that had the night vision devices weren't willing to shoot the people with the candle power, or with the spotlights with millions of candle power, just trying to back at them.
So what about, are there systems that marry the two?
To a degree, yep. Okay. There is a new form of technology that's coming out. It's pretty expensive right now. Hopefully over time things will come down. They're using them in a lot of factories for processing different assembly lines and stuff like that. And it's called SWIR, shortwave infrared imaging. It is really interesting. It sort of marries the two wavelengths between night vision, what we can see on the visible spectrum, and infrared. Okay. Kind of marries the two of them together in a way. And it allows you to see really, really, really far with really great accuracy and in a thermal spectrum.
Ooh.
So, which is really cool. We can, I don't know if you want to I can send you some links or whatever. You can put them up in the show notes or whatnot. Yeah. But there's some really cool pictures out there where they're looking at mountains 30 kilometers away behind a house that regular imaging can't even see because it's in a thermal spectrum. So as well, but it also looks like a real picture with thermal going on a similar wavelength and color pattern. So you don't even realize it's picking up thermal. It just shows it to you.
Oh, it's wild.
Really, really cool.
And I guess this was the third option you were talking about, but it's pretty expensive. And I guess it's a scale issue. Maybe that'll come down in the future. Okay, so in the big question is, what are we talking about for one of those toys?
Oh, I haven't even priced them.
Okay,
it's that bad. I've heard it's not anywhere near where I'd want to touch. I have heard that there are some high-end security systems that do incorporate SWIR into them. But yeah, it's pretty epic. When you see a picture, when I saw the first picture of it, I was like, I just want to get rid of my night vision units and my thermal. I just want that.
Wow.
But it's pretty cool. Now, that being said, there is actually another night vision device that married infrared. There's actually two, excuse me. there is a thermal clip-on unit that can go in front of a PVS 14, and it gives you a thermal overlay over your night vision device. So in a little square pattern inside your round objective. And so that's pretty cool. It's not cheap, right?
Right.
But
none of this stuff is.
But it's there.
Yeah.
You can get it, and it will give you, so you'll have the best of both worlds. You have night vision and this clip-on thermal unit, which goes in front of your...
That's a lot of crap on the front end of a... Yeah.
It gets pretty heavy.
Yeah.
It does get pretty heavy, but you learn to do it, deal with it. And then there's also a standalone unit that came like that. So it's used by a couple of groups in the military, and it is a night vision device that also has a thermal imaging attached to it, and it overlays the thermal onto the night vision device. And it's really cool the way that system works, because it only highlights the heat inside your thermal or your night vision device. Okay. So it's kind of cool. It just shows like a highlight of whatever's really hot inside your night vision. So you have the night vision, you can move around and do all your other fun stuff, use your IR lasers and things like that. But it also will show you where the infrared's coming through. So
even though none of these things are cheap, as we were just joking about, but what are your suggestions? Like, and we can start with basic home security. Somebody goes out and they want to get a thermal monocle. What are they playing? Monopoly? Monocular. What are we talking about there? Like,
some of these companies think you have monopoly money, right? The way these things are out there and available in the market. I wish it was that case, but no. So what I would recommend for, let's say, thermal, right? So let's go out there. Let's look at, like, for instance, FLIR has a really good monocular thermal imaging unit, right? So you can go out there and just type in, FLIR thermal imager, see what comes up, look in your price range, see what's out there. And then once you find your price range, think about it. Say, okay, this is what I want. Will this give me my capability? But there's videos out there. I could talk all the technical details I want all day long, but that's not going to help anybody listening to a radio show. Right. We're talking about something that's visual. So what we want to do is you want to go out there and do all your own research on this. Look at them, look at the videos, look at the refresh rates, look at the clarity. And then same thing with night vision. I would not recommend anybody that wants to do any sort of either home defense or security or hunting or anything like that for night vision be less than a Gen 2 unit. Okay. Don't even bother with the Gen 1. It's a waste of your money and time, because you're going to get frustrated with it. You're going to think, oh, this is the best thing in the world, and it's going to suck. For what you want, because when we talk about it, it's fine if I can see a shape, but if I can't clearly identify whether they're holding an umbrella or a gun, what does that matter to me? Right. So I want to be able to, at least within a few yards, right? Minimum. Most of those won't even give you that. But yes, so that's my recommendation to anybody that wants to get into this. Go out there, look at it, do your research. There's a couple of good companies I can recommend. TNVC, the night vision company, they are really, really sort of tip of the spear in the way that they operate their company and the options that they have. They sell factory units, and they also make some of their own for night vision gear. And also they have all the other fun toys on there that are super uber duper expensive Monopoly money stuff. And you can go dream all you want and drool over it. But a lot of their stuff is pretty reasonably priced. And I believe they've also just teamed up recently with a company that is offering lower cost units for hunting applications. And so that might be where a lot of people would want to start too, is somewhere in that range. You're not going to have your auto gated features and things like that, but you can get a Gen 2 Plus unit for, $1,800-$1,900, which is pretty good. I think it's $1,800-$1,900, which is pretty reasonable.
Reasonable being a relative term.
When we're talking about, the Gen 3 Pinnacle units ranging up to $4,000 almost, you're talking less than half the cost of that. So yes, that seems more reasonable at that point. Again, your mileage may vary a little bit.
Yeah. Well, dude, awesome. Anything else we should know before we should close out?
One of the other things I briefly touched on was the home security systems use this active system, and they have night vision capability, quote unquote. And so they send out the active infrared right around the security camera. Look at those, test those. They're not all created equal. If you want to have a good home security system that does night as well, look into the capabilities that thing offers, and don't just say, oh, it is rated for night vision, right? It has a night vision capability. look into it, make sure it works. Because some of those can't see past 5 feet with those things.
Wow. Okay.
And some of them can go out 30, 40 yards.
Yeah, you can get into like the commercial, what is it? Axis makes some pretty crazy. Axis and FLIR both make some pretty crazy systems.
Yeah, it's really good.
But you're also talking about you're going to start spending some real money.
You can, and there's also some reasonable ones out there. So do your due diligence, just like anything that I recommend. Do your due diligence, do your research. And of course, anything else, if you're going to use this, if you're going to invest in something, just like I tell people, if you're going to invest in a bunch of guns, have a decent fire rated burglar resistant safe, right? Put them in there and protect your investment. Same thing with purchasing some sort of night vision or thermal. One, you can add it to your homeowner's insurance, right? Which is great. And that way it's insured. Secondly, train with it. Understand how it works. Train with it. Use it in different lighting conditions. Use it on a nice starry night. Use it on a night with no moon, no stars. Use it in your home. Buy a reasonably priced infrared illuminator. You're going to look into lasers. Do your research on that. You can spend anywhere from $150 all the way up to several $1,000s that cost almost as much as the night vision units do, or more in some cases. And do your research on those. But train with it. If you're gonna do it, get some fun out of it. Why do I want to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on something and then just like pull it out every once in a while and show people? You might get some joy out of that, but I promise you, running around at night and scaring your wife is going to be a lot better.
I think we'll close off there. Josh, dude, as always, thanks for being in here. And, we're having a good time hanging out today anyway.
Yeah, man.
But thanks for being on the show, dude.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Take care.
Show notes, links, and resources from this episode can be found at intherabbithole.com/E219. One more time before we close out. The next season starts August 7th. Again, that's August 7th. Set your calendars. From the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.